If you're a returning viewer on the Legacy of Survival channel, make sure you subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear isn't the typical surface-level WWII trivia. This is the kind of material that makes serious historians lean in, and survival-minded listeners take notes. For the next few minutes, I want to walk you through 8 little-known realities, secrets really, that WWII soldiers kept from their commanders. Not myths, not dramatized Hollywood moments, but the real human decisions made under pressure that often shaped the course of battles more than official orders ever did. These weren't just battlefield quirks, they were survival tactics, moral calculations, and split-second choices that reveal the raw truth behind the war. And by understanding them, we don't just satisfy our curiosity. We uncover timeless lessons about leadership, resilience, and decision-making that still apply to everyday life and survival planning today. Soldiers often hid the fact that they rationed ammunition differently than command expected because wasting rounds meant risking survival later. Many soldiers, especially on the Eastern Front and in the Pacific, quietly created their own personal ammo reserves. Official doctrine assumed a predictable rate of fire, but men on the ground quickly learned that real combat didn't follow spreadsheets. Some soldiers fired short, controlled bursts instead of the heavy suppressive fire their commanders demanded. Others tucked away extra clips in their packs or hid them under floorboards in dugouts. Commanders hated this because it disrupted logistical calculations, so troops kept it to themselves. Modern lesson. In any crisis, you'll face instructions designed for ideal conditions. When reality shifts, you may need to quietly adjust. The practical method is simple. Always build your own buffer, whether that's extra batteries, extra food, or extra tools. And don't assume official supply lines will run perfectly when everything is falling apart. Frontline troops frequently concealed psychological strain to avoid being reassigned, mistrusted, or medically removed from their units. WWII troops understood that admitting fear, exhaustion, or trauma could lead to being labelled unreliable. So men hid trembling hands, sleepless nights, and shell shock because they didn't want to lose the trust of their comrades or get pulled from their positions. Many who experienced what we now call PTSD simply pushed forward because the alternative felt worse. Right? So, modern application. Stress is, well, just unavoidable in extreme situations. The takeaway here isn't to hide it, but to, build these quiet coping systems while still keeping things ticking over. Soldiers back then, they developed small rituals, like cleaning their gear, writing letters home, or just doing repetitive tasks, to stabilize themselves. And honestly, you can do the same by building mental routines that help keep you grounded when the pressure starts to mount. Now, here's the thing. Some soldiers intentionally ignored certain orders because, well, they actually knew the terrain better than the officers giving the commands. It wasn't about rebellion, really. It was about survival. Officers were often fresh out of schools, dropped into units that had already spent months, sometimes longer, studying the local ground. So, when a commander ordered a charge through ground the soldiers knew was a kill zone, some squads would accidentally take longer routes or misinterpret the timing of an assault. And in countless cases, these decisions saved lives. And, sometimes even ensured the mission was a success. So, the modern takeaway is this. First-hand knowledge always beats distant authority. Whether you're leading a team or just preparing your own survival setup, you've got to trust the person closest to the situation. Walk the terrain yourself, test your tools, and above all, never outsource judgment you'll personally pay for. That's the real lesson. Troops often, kept secret their informal barter networks that functioned as black market lifelines for gear, food and medicine. On every front, soldiers traded with locals, other units and even enemy troops. Now, commanders tried to shut this down, but the reality was simple. Unofficial trade kept men alive. A soldier might swap spare socks for antibiotics, rifle oil for better food, or cigarettes for intelligence. Command didn't like losing control over supplies, so, soldiers kept these networks in the shadows. Practical application. In any long-term crisis, informal trade becomes more important than official channels. Build relationships, know what you can offer, and identify what is valuable before scarcity makes it expensive. Some soldiers hid captured enemy equipment because honestly, using it unofficially was often more effective than issued gear. Whether it was a German MG-42, a Japanese Nambu pistol, or simple enemy boots that fit better than their own, many soldiers quietly adopted enemy equipment even though regulations forbade it. Using enemy gear could get you mistaken for the enemy or reprimanded, but the advantage in reliability, firepower or comfort was worth the risk to many. So, here's a modern lesson for you. Practicality beats purity, every single time. When you're evaluating tools, whether it's knives, backpacks or radios, focus on reliability and effectiveness, not just the so-called official recommendation. Honestly, test out a few different options and, just use what actually works. Soldiers often hid evidence of improvisation because command wanted discipline, not creativity, even though, at the end of the day, creativity saved lives. Men would rebuild broken grenades, machine missing parts, reinforce boots with scavenged leather. And, believe it or not, create early DIY booby traps using nothing but a bit of wire and some tin cans. Improvisation was technically frowned upon, so naturally soldiers kept their best tricks quiet. The modern application is pretty clear. Learn to improvise before you actually need to. Practice making fire in several different ways, repairing your gear with basic tools and repurposing everyday items. The skill you build now will give you that same quiet edge soldiers relied on back then. Some troops actually concealed the extent of their cooperation with local civilians who provided intelligence or even shelter. In occupied territories, civilians often risked execution just to help Allied soldiers. Troops protected these relationships by keeping them hidden, not only from the enemy, but sometimes even from their own officers, who, were obligated to report any unauthorized contact. So, here's the thing. In any environment, information is currency. Building trust with locals, or really anyone who knows the land, can be the difference between success and failure. Soldiers, often hid the fact that they stayed behind after evacuation orders to recover equipment, help wounded friends, or just finish some unfinished tasks. To commanders, this looked like insubordination or carelessness. But for many soldiers, loyalty to their comrades mattered more than those clockwork evacuation plans. They stayed behind to drag a friend out, recover maps, or even disable equipment the enemy could use. They simply reported they got delayed, and, well, the secret stayed within the unit. The modern lesson is this. Loyalty and responsibility often pull you in directions official plans just don't account for. Build your team carefully, because in a crisis you'll depend on each other more than any policy, really. If this deep dive into 8 insane secrets WWII soldiers kept from their commanders gave you new insight, make sure you subscribe, share this video with a fellow history buff, and help keep the legacy of survival community growing.